Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Don't you love it when words take on new meaning? My prayer for you today is that you will never hear the words except and only the same way again. Welcome to the Bible for Busy People. My name is Erica, and I so appreciate your company. Thank you for being part of this community. I want to say hi to Janelle. She is a cake pop baker. I can't think of a more fun occupation. So hi, Janelle, and happy baking. Really appreciate you. Now I want a cake pop. All right. This week on the Bible for Busy People, we are exploring Mission Possible. Unlike the movie, we believe with God, anything is possible. And if he sends us on a mission, he's coming with, which is just so reassuring, isn't it? Today, we're going to first start with the word accept. Okay. Join me in 2 Kings chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, and get ready to never hear the word accept the same way again. One day, the widow of a member of the group of prophets came to Elisha, which, by the way, little note here, Elisha was a man of God. He was a prophet, which is kind of like being a mail carrier for God. He delivered God's messages to his people. Okay, back to the widow now, who is crying out to Elisha. My husband who served you is dead, and you know how he feared the Lord. But now a creditor has come, threatening to take my 2 sons as slaves. What can I do to help you? Elisha asked. Tell me, what do you have in the house? Nothing at all. Here comes our word, except a flask of olive oil, she replied. And Elisha said, borrow as many empty jars as you can from your friends and neighbors. Then go into your house with your sons and shut the door behind you. Pour olive oil from your flask into the jars, setting each one aside when it is filled. So she did as she was told. Her sons kept bringing jars to her, and she filled one after another. Soon, every container was full to the brim. Bring me another jar, she said to one of her sons. There aren't any more, he told her. And then the olive oil stopped flowing. When she told the man of God what had happened, he said to her, now sell the olive oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on what is left. This is a bona fide miracle, isn't it? And it's remarkable because remember at the beginning of the story, when Elisha asked her, what do you have in the house? She said, nothing at all, except that flask of olive oil. Oh, here is the difference. Sometimes it feels like we're down to nothing. All we have is one more flask of faith or energy or hope, whatever it is. Maybe for you, it is financial. Maybe there are creditors calling your phone instead of knocking on your door like they did to this widow. Listen, a flask of oil or hope or faith or energy in the hands of God is different. That's the exception. Whatever you have today, if you put it in the Lord's hands, I believe he will multiply it. I believe if you only have a quarter cup apiece, he can make that last and last because he is the Prince of Peace. He is the source. So there's our word accept. Are you ready to move on to only? Let's do it. Before we dive into Matthew chapter 14, I want to give you a little context. Jesus has just heard some really sad news. He learned that his cousin, John the Baptist, who was a very faithful man, the man God tapped to announce that Jesus was coming, had been beheaded. So put yourself in the place of Jesus in this moment and think how he must have been feeling. Jesus wept. We learn this by reading the Bible. When his friend Lazarus died, the Bible says Jesus wept. He was 100% human and 100% God. My pastor was just talking about this in church on Sunday. Jesus felt all the emotions. So keep that in the back of your mind as we turn to Matthew 14, beginning in verse 13. As soon as Jesus heard the news, he left in a boat to a remote area to be alone. But the crowds heard where he was headed and followed on foot from many towns. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Isn't that beautiful that Jesus stepped outside of his grief? Of course, Jesus knew better than anybody that heaven was real and that he would see his cousin John again. But still, in these moments, he stepped outside of that grief, leaned into God, and offered what he had to the people. He gave them his heart, his compassion, and his love. Isn't Jesus amazing? Verse 15 now. That evening, so it's the same evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "That isn't necessary. You feed them." Here comes our word. "But we have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here," he said. Then he told the people to sit down on the grass. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up toward heaven and blessed them. Then, breaking the loaves into pieces, he gave the bread to the disciples, who distributed it to the people. They all ate as much as they wanted. And afterward, the disciples picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. About 5,000 men were fed that day, in addition to all the women and children. Jesus is so cool. He made a miracle out of a sack lunch. It's what he does. Have you ever said out loud to somebody you love, like, "I'm only human"? I think Billy Joel wrote a song about that. I'm only human. Maybe there's somebody who you really want to help and you only have $5. Give him your only $5. Maybe you want to serve somewhere, but you only have an hour on the weekend. Give him your only hour. Put your only in Jesus's hands and see what happens. See if he doesn't make another miracle out of your only. Until next time, you are really loved. Thank you for making time for the Bible for Busy People today. If being part of this community is a blessing to you, it's super easy to share this podcast with someone you love. We're all about spreading the hope of Jesus like butter. So if you've got a moment to write a review, boy, we'd really appreciate that. Maybe you need a little prayer today, or you're ready to take that next step with God. I invite you to check out our show notes. You're going to find lots of encouragement there. This podcast is one branch on a tree called Purposely, a podcast network designed with practical podcasts to help you find and thrive in God's purpose for your life. If you've got a pulse, you've got a purpose.